Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to my sit down with Todd Hirsch, Chief Economist and VP with ATB Financial. Who's this guy, you're wondering? My name's Abelar. There'll be a link in the description of the video where you can find more information on me, if you want it. This video was taken from here in February, just days ago, during a seminar that I put on monthly for the Edmonton Real Estate Investors Association. Todd touches kind of where 2020 brought us and what's the outlook for 2021 here in Alberta and Canada. Todd Hirsch, well, like I mentioned, he's the VP and Chief Economist for ATB Financial, but he holds degrees in economics from both the U of A and the U of C. And for the last 20 years, he's worked as an economist at numerous organizations, including the Canada West Foundation and the Bank of Canada, which is no small feat. He's also the author of 3 books. His latest is Spiders in Space, Successfully Adapting to Unwanted Change. And that was released in 2017, but wow, very pertinent to these days. He's a strong advocate for the arts and culture community in Alberta. So he's a board chair for the Calgary Arts Academy. He's on the boards of the Glenbow Museum and the Alberta Ballet. So between the two, he's a busy guy. So we'll jump over to Todd's presentation right where it started within my seminar, and they'll tell us what to expect in 2021. And he is one of the probably the best dressing economist that anybody will ever know. if you ever met him or seen pictures online, Todd, you're a snappy dresser.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Now I feel bad that I have my Walmart.
Where's the snazzy?
I know. Had I known there was going to be some buildup, I would have thrown a jacket on or something. But it's freezing cold in my home this evening. I'm in the upstairs bedroom where, for whatever reason, it's not very warm. So I'm going to go for comfort tonight over style and fashion. I hope you forgive me for that. But thank you for the invite, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you to share some of my thoughts about what's going to happen in Alberta's economy. I know it's a big topic for everybody right now, and probably not least of all your group. So I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen. Let's see. I think, does someone want to give me a thumbs up if you see... Oh, not thanks for listening. Pardon me. I got to start over here. Does that look good? You see the big purple with no tabs?
Hello there. Yeah.
All right, great. So the title of my talk tonight, and I am going to leave some time at the end for some questions and answers, so you can get ready for that. Alberta's Economy 2021, some tools to help make sense of it all. I love this quote here from Dwight Eisenhower. Plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. I think he's really captured the spirit of this here. Plans, if they are static, the noun, they sit on the shelf, they very quickly become stale, and they are in fact useless. But planning, that is the active verb. That is what keeps changing and evolving as the situation requires. And that is the bit that's indispensable. So I'm going to springboard off this to give it a bit of an economics twist. Predictions are useless, but predicting is indispensable. About a year ago, maybe a little bit more than a year ago, but around January, February of 2020, no doubt I would have had a lot of predictions for what we were going to see in Alberta's economy in 2020. But of course, those predictions became useless very quickly, as very soon in March of last year, the pandemic dug its heels in and everything changed. But even though my predictions became useless, I didn't stop predicting. I changed and altered and updated my predictions as the situation changed. And of course, 2020 was quite a year. Here we are, early 2021, and a lot of questions about where Alberta's economy is at and what can we expect this year. I'm going to use 3 tools tonight to describe Alberta's economy, and I think they'll help give us a bit of a a backdrop or some context to talk about where Alberta's economy is going to go. So those three tools, and then at the very end, I will offer some of my active predicting to describe where I think things are going to land. The tools I'm going to use tonight, they don't look like the carpenter's tool kit. Instead, I'm going to use a butterfly, the alphabet, and a 4-layer sponge cake. Let's start first of all with the butterfly. No doubt most of you are familiar or you've heard of what we call the butterfly effect. This notion drawn from chaos theory that would suggest that sometimes even an insignificant action, like a butterfly flapping its wings in Africa, can have a ripple effect that builds and builds until it creates a hurricane somewhere else in the world. And that's what's known as the butterfly effect. Well, tonight I'm not going to talk about butterflies in Africa, but in North America earlier this year, there was an event that is having ripple effects and tremors being felt here in Alberta. The event took place in Georgia, and no doubt most of you are aware that on January 5th, voters in the state of Georgia were called to a runoff election. There were 2 vacant Senate seats that had not yet been decided from the November elections, and Georgians had to vote on these 2 Senate positions. Now, it was widely expected that the Republicans would retain control of those 2 seats. But in a bit of a surprising twist, both those seats in Georgia went to the Democrats. That changed everything for us here in Alberta. Why? Well, it all had to do with something you've probably heard of, the Keystone XL Pipeline. What those 2 Senate seats that went to the Democrats did was they made the Keystone XL Pipeline a far less valuable trump card. I hate to use the word trump, maybe bargaining chip is a better expression, a far less valuable bargaining chip for President Biden. Prior to those 2 seats in Georgia going to the Democrats, President Biden knew that he would have to get he'd have to get Republican support in the Senate in order to pass some of his more aggressive environmental policies. And he was probably keeping the Keystone XL Pipeline as one of those bargaining chips that he could offer to the Republicans in order to get their support. But after those 2 seats in Georgia went to the Democrats, by the slimmest of margins, now control the Senate and, of course, the Keystone XL Pipeline thrown into question. And we saw on Inauguration Day, of course, the president lived up to his promise, and that is to cancel the project altogether. Now, I get it. There's been all sorts of weeping and gnashing of teeth, and here in Alberta, lots of frustration around this. This pipeline has been on again, off again for 15 years. And President, we shouldn't be surprised. I understand the frustration, but no one in Alberta can seriously say they are surprised by this because, after all, President Biden did campaign on killing this project and repeated several times that he opposed it. So it's kind of a blow for Alberta, but I would also suggest if we step back and take a broader perspective of the Biden administration, there's probably more good news in store for Alberta's energy industry than just the bad news around Keystone XL. 3 reasons why I think President Biden is going to give us some good news to our energy industry this year. The first, we remember back about 4 years ago when President Trump took office, one of the first things he got busy doing was he eliminated a lot of the environmental rules and regulations in the energy sector in the United States. It was the Wild West. Fracking opened up, shale oil production just took off because of the reduction in all of the regulations. That really put Canada at a competitive disadvantage. And for 4 years, there's been this, what we call this sucking sound stateside, pulling down capital and drilling equipment and people, even energy company headquarters, moving from Canada to the United States, where the environment was much more competitive. And that, among other things, was a real penalty for our energy industry. President Biden is going to reverse all of that. He's been very, very clear that he is going to, in fact, they've already been introducing some policies around tightening up the regulations and restrictions around fracking and around shale oil production. That, no intention of Mr. Biden, but that is going to give Canada back our competitive advantage, or at least puts the two countries on more level playing field. That will stop that sucking sound, and it'll actually give our industry a little bit of a boost as we're now competing more evenly. The second reason why we've got more good news, related to the first reason, I suppose, but the tighter restrictions and regulations on shale oil is going to restrict supply in the United States. That will act to push price higher. We've already been seeing prices that got pretty close to $59 a barrel today, which is about where prices were. And here we're talking the West Texas Intermediate benchmark price. Prices are about where they were pre-COVID, at not too bad a level at all. No, oil's not at $100 a barrel, but it's also not at minus $40 a barrel either. It's back around $58, $59 a barrel. Some of that, a lot of that is due to Saudi Arabia and some of the restrictions in the OPEC plus countries. Some of it is due to supply drawdowns, but some of it is also due simply to the fact that producers know it is going to be more difficult and more costly to produce in the US. That will restrict supply. So I think we can anticipate somewhat higher oil prices under the Biden administration. That's good news for us here in Alberta. And the third reason why, and I'll say a bit more about this at the end of the presentation, President Biden has really moved the United States to catch up to where Canada and a lot of other countries around the world are already around environmental commitments. He's re-entered the United States in the Paris Accord. He's reconfirmed commitments for the United States to move to net zero carbon by the year 2050, exactly where Canada is. Now, in order for them to get there, even to reach their Paris Accord commitments, they're going to do some heavy lifting around clean energy technology and renewable energy. Alberta, we are a world leader in very specific types of clean energy technology, notably carbon capture and storage, and we're world leaders in some renewable energies as well, particularly wind. And I think this offers Alberta a really great opportunity to sell some of those technologies to our friends in the United States who are going to be looking quite closely or looking quite hard to find solutions to meet their carbon commitments. So all of that is to say, I mean, I understand why people are disappointed around President Biden canceling Keystone, but I would suggest if we step back and take a broader view, there's actually more good news for our industry than there is negative news. So that's the first tool, the butterfly effect, what happened in Georgia, President Biden, and the good news around some of his environmental policies. The next tool I want to use is the alphabet. Now, no doubt many of you you're used to hearing economists use letters of the alphabet to describe recessions and recoveries. Very often we'll talk about a V-shaped downturn, followed by a very swift recovery, the classic V-shaped recovery. Sometimes it's a U-shaped recession and recovery, whereby the economy takes longer to get going. Sometimes it's W, the dreaded double dip recession, two recessions in a short time frame. Sometimes it's L. You really don't want the L-shaped recession where the economy never really materializes or a recovery never materializes at all. But in 2021, we're talking about the K-shaped recession and a K-shaped recovery. And this is kind of a new letter that economists have started to use to describe the very unique situation that we are living through COVID. And it applies to Alberta, it applies to Canada, and probably many other places around the world. Let me explain the K-shape. Back at the beginning of 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic first arrived, right around the beginning of March or middle of March, the economy here in Alberta tanked hard. The second quarter, so I'm talking April, May, June, we saw a contraction of Alberta's economy of about 15% almost overnight. It was unprecedented. We all remember what it was like watching the entire economy shut down. That was followed in the third and fourth quarters, basically the second half of the year, by some stability. Now, by no means did the economy go back to where it was pre-COVID, but it also stabilized. It didn't go down any further. A lot of that was because of the partial reopening of the economy that we saw in June and July, with retail and restaurants being allowed to open under strict conditions. But a lot of that stabilizing was also due to government income support programs. And I know economists will be debating this forever, if those programs were well designed or not, or if it could have been done better. And, Ottawa really did err on the side of speed to make sure to get money into the hands of businesses and people. And that really did help stabilize. Yeah, we're going to have to, add that to our debt, and that'll have to be paid for eventually. But in the immediacy of the pandemic, those programs stabilized the economy. Now we're into 2021, and the timing of the recovery is a little bit unknown. More about that later. But we do expect that in the second half of 2021, we will see a broader reopening of the economy and a recovery. Now, it depends who you are as to what kind of recovery you're going to expect. For some workers, it is going to be a strong recovery. It's going to be good times. These are knowledge workers. These are professional occupations. Generally, these are higher income earners. Back in 2020, we talked about how everybody is working from home. Well, in fact, Stats Canada estimates that only about 25 to 30% of Canadian workers even have the type of job where they're able to work from home. And if you are able to work from home, if you have the technology available that you can work remotely, almost certainly you are going to be a higher income earner. These types of workers were never hit as badly by the pandemic, at least in terms of their income or their job security. We didn't even really, in most of those occupations, we didn't really see too much job loss. Now, these workers worked happily away at home. I shouldn't say happily, because it was, for everybody, COVID was a real strain. But they were working from home. Their income was more or less uninterrupted. Because they weren't out spending money in the same way, a lot of these workers have amassed a lot of savings. And when the economy reopens at some point this year, it is going to feel like good times. They're going to be out spending money on travel, on sporting events, going to festivals, getting together with big groups in restaurants. There's going to be some real celebration when the economy reopens. So that is a portion of workers in Alberta. However, there is another group of workers who will experience a distinct non-recovery. These are workers predominantly in the service sector, particularly in industries like food and accommodation, retail, segments of the oil and gas sector, especially oil well drilling services, segments of the healthcare and construction sectors. These jobs tend to be part-time. They tend to be a lower skill set, and they generally offer lower income. These are the workers who really depended quite heavily on the government income support programs throughout 2020 and into 21. Now, we know that these government income supports are going to have to come to an end, probably dovetailing with the reopening of the economy. But these workers, many of them, will be unable to find work simply because the businesses that they used to work for, the restaurants and the retail operations and the drilling service contractors, a lot of those will fail to reopen. They will simply not exist, leaving a lot of these workers not only unemployed, but also without the government income support programs. And my prediction is that for a lot of these workers, the second half of 2021 is going to feel quite desperate. Now, it might be tempting for people who are in that top part of the recovery, the strong recovery part of the K. It might be tempting for them to say, wow, am I ever glad I'm in the up part of the K? I don't need to worry about any of this. I'm looking forward to the good times ahead. But I would suggest that all of us in Alberta, we need to pay attention to this, because this could become quite problematic. This increasing gap in the disparity of income and opportunity between citizens. We see what's happened in other countries, even long before COVID, when that income gap or the gap of, or the disparity of income grows wide enough, it tends to lead to social and economic and even political turmoil. We've seen what's happened to our neighbors to the south in the US, where that income disparity is quite wide. Other countries like the United Kingdom, where the income gap is quite wide. There tends to be a lot of social upheaval and social division. Now, here in Canada, in Alberta, pre-COVID, those income disparities were not quite as wide, but they are growing. And COVID is going to accelerate that gap. And a year or so from now, we could find ourselves in a situation where many people in Alberta are doing exceptionally well financially, but many others are falling into absolute desperation. I don't know what the solution to this is. I wish I did. I think all of us need to pay attention to it. And I think we need to brace ourselves as Canadians and as Albertans, brace ourselves for some adult conversations about what the future of government income support programs look like. I don't believe, and I would have said this even before COVID, I don't believe that our 20th century version of income support, all those programs that were set up in the 1950s and 1960s, they were designed for a very different labor market, a very different economy. I don't think post-COVID they are going to be sufficient, and I think we need to understand we need to reevaluate those income support programs and come up with something that makes more sense. So that is the K, the letter K as a tool, the bifurcation, the strong recovery for some, the non-recovery for others, and why we need to pay attention to this. My final tool tonight is the 4-layer sponge cake. And this might be making some of you hungry. I haven't had dinner yet, so it's making me hungry. When we think of the economy, we often think of it only in one way, but in fact, there are 4 different segments or aspects of our economy, and each requires its own attention, and each is equally important. Let me dissect these 4 layers for you and describe them. The first layer at the top, that nice layer with all that delicious fruit right at the top that looks so appealing, this is the market economy, also known as the private sector. This is where most of us sort of live and work and earn our incomes. This is what we would call the tech sector, financial markets, resource extraction like oil and gas, real estate like you're involved in, entertainment, personal services, agriculture, basically anything that is profit motivated in our capitalist system. This is a really important part of the economy. And again, it's the one most of us sort of default to think about when we think about the economy. But it is by no means the only level. Underneath the market economy, we have the non-market economy, also known as the public sector. Infrastructure, public education, our system of universities and colleges, roads, public transport, aspects of the arts and culture, healthcare, parks, fire, police. All of these things, it's difficult to provide these with a profit motivation, because a lot of them, there's not really much profit you can generate from them. In some cases, like private universities or private healthcare, you can, but a lot of these really don't lend themselves to the market economy, but they're very important. So collectively, we produce these things through our governments, and economists call them public goods. And the funding for them, of course, is really important. Now, you already see the interaction or the dependency between even these 2 layers. We need the non-market economy. We need roads and educated people and healthcare in order for the market economy above to operate. However, we also need the market economy to operate in order to pay for all those nice things in the non-market economy beneath it. The third layer is the one that I think gets overlooked most of the time. But my hope is that through COVID, more of us are maybe gaining a deeper appreciation for this level of the economy. This is the social economy, also known as the community. This is our network of family, of friends. This is networks of volunteers, public health and mental wellness. And here we can talk about how COVID is eroding those. Faith communities, charities, altruism, social organizations, all of these things that operate in the background that tend to sort of be forgotten or maybe taken for granted, especially when we think about the economy. If most of us thought about, well, what's really important in the economy? I don't know if very many of us would say, well, we need our population to be healthy and to be mentally well. Maybe more and more of us are having those conversations, and we might be understanding that more. But the social economy is extremely important. The fourth and final layer, but by no means least, the natural environment, also known as planet Earth. The air, the fresh water resources we have, our oceans, soil, forests and trees, land use, including things like forestation and landfills, carbon sinks, and here we can talk about climate change, greenhouse gases, and just general pollution. If we don't have an Earth that we can inhabit, none of the rest of it above is going to matter. Now, you do notice, of course, some real tensions these days between the natural environment at the bottom and the market economy at the top, especially around climate change. Now, a lot of debate around, well, how much carbon are we putting into the environment, and how much longer can our Earth take all this abuse? And people will have these arguments about, well, what's more important, polar bear habitat, or the ability for me to work and earn income and provide for my family? And we get into trouble when we use the word important. And instead of because all of these layers are important, and if you try to debate which level is more important, you get into sort of logical and moral dead ends. You're never going to be able to answer those questions. But rather than stacking them up in order of importance, I would say there is an order of foundation we need to understand. And it looks like this: the natural environment at the bottom. Again, not saying it's more important, but it is foundational to everything else we do. On top of that, community. None of us would be here if it wasn't for, at some level, our system of family, of friends, our networks, our social connections, our mental wellness. On top of that, the non-market economy. None of us would also be here if it wasn't for public education, at least at some level, and on the public roads that we drive on. And at the very top, at the very top, the market economy. Now, that market economy box is the smallest, not because it's the least important, but only because not much of the rest of the cake underneath it depends on it. What I like to think about is the Amazon River in Brazil, part of the natural environment in the purple box. The Amazon River does not need Amazon.com, but Amazon.com certainly needs the Amazon River, or sort of metaphorically, it needs a healthy planet Earth in which to operate. But when we debate these things, sometimes our priority looks like this. We tend to put the market economy at the top anytime there is a policy debate, or when voters ask their elected officials to do something. Very often it is the market economy that we prioritize above everything else. And I don't think this is unusual. In fact, this is kind of normal, because in fact, most of us, we got a lot of skin in the game in that market economy. Most of us, like I said earlier, this is where we derive our income. This is where we derive our livelihoods, our careers, how we support ourselves and our families. This is what provides opportunities for young people in colleges and universities. We all want the idea that the market economy is going to provide new jobs and opportunities for them. And there's nothing wrong with that mentality. The market economy is very important, but we have to understand if our priorities are too far out of line, it is going to destabilize the entire economy. That cake on the left, most of you no doubt are fans of the TV show Cake Wars. For those of you who don't know it, it's this really fun sort of game show or reality contest on one of the food networks. And these cake artists, these designers, they build these beautiful, elaborate cakes. Many of them are quite tall, like a couple of feet tall. And half the fun of the show is watching these cakes go taller and taller. Invariably, some of the cakes start to wobble, and sometimes they topple over. And if they do, it's because every single time, not enough attention was paid to the foundation. So we can't really solve these debates if we argue which level of the economy is more important. But I think we need to understand there is a level of foundation that we have to understand. And that should guide us as we debate policies around the economy going forward. Just to wrap up, to offer some of my active forecasting for 2021, what are we expecting for Alberta this year? Well, we do expect economic growth is going to resume as the vaccine rolls out. However, there are lots of questions about the timing and the coverage of the vaccine. Already we're finding out, since the vaccine first arrived in Alberta, I guess maybe about a month and a half ago, mid-December, since that time, we thought this, we've learned this is much more challenging to vaccinate an entire planet. There's been frustrations, of course, with Ottawa securing enough vaccines, and there's going to be lots of finger pointing for a long time. But suffice to say, the slower the vaccine rollout and the fewer people who accept the vaccine, that will delay the economic recovery. And I know different people will have different thoughts about the vaccine, and it's absolutely a personal choice if you choose to be vaccinated or not. But as an economist, I'm here to tell you, if we do not achieve herd immunity soon, that every week or every month that we fail to do it, it is going to delay the economic recovery. The jobless rate is going to remain high, probably around 10 or 11%. And again, we think of the letter K as our tool. It matters who you are. And especially for those service sector workers, the jobless rate could tick even higher in 2021 as those businesses the businesses they work for fail to reopen. The energy sector is mostly stable. In fact, we might even see some growth out of the energy sector this year. We see oil prices, as I said, well above $50 a barrel. And for Alberta, generally speaking, it's not this for every specific oil producer, but for the industry overall, $50 WTI is kind of the break-even mark. And now with oil at $58 a barrel, there's more renewed optimism that we might even see some growth, maybe some capital spending. But we are starting at a low level. Ever since 2014, when oil prices were at $100 a barrel, we've seen year after year the energy sector kind of contracting and shrinking. So we do expect some growth, at least some stability in the energy sector this year, but we're starting at a low level. But the good news is, and I'll end on this, the economy is going to continue to evolve and adapt post-COVID and even through 2021. Very quickly, I want to share with you the three sectors of Alberta's economy where I see the most optimism and the most opportunity for new employment. The first, technology and digital sectors. Now, the tech sector, this is not new for Alberta. We've had a vibrant tech sector for a long time. People don't often realize it. But we are probably behind the curve where other cities like Waterloo or Vancouver or Austin, Texas, we're behind where those cities are, probably 30 years behind. We've got some catching up to do. And we saw the tech sector really kind of taking off through COVID and into 2021, almost daily, both in Edmonton and in Calgary. There are encouraging signs of tech companies that are moving to Alberta. They're expanding their operations in Alberta, and they're hiring people. So that's the first sector. The second, and I'm always bullish on this, agriculture and particularly agri-foods. Now, any self-respecting farmer will point out that agriculture has been a backbone of this province far longer than the energy industry. And in 2020 and 2021, agriculture continued to do very well. The traditional agriculture, that's the beef, the wheat, the canola, that still accounts for roughly 70% of Alberta's farm cash receipts. And that 70% is more or less stable. Any given year, prices might be up or down, or there might be drought or good conditions. 2020 was actually a really good year. But where I'm more optimistic about growth and expansion is the other 30% of the farm cash receipts. Here now we're talking about more diversified crops, some of them new to Alberta, some of them not so new, but we're talking about things like cannabis. We're talking about things like pulses and chickpeas and beans. We're talking about vegetables, especially potatoes. Little known fact, but Alberta in 2020 surpassed Prince Edward Island and is now Canada's largest potato producing region, and it's only expanding. And then, talking about potatoes and cannabis, we can sort of springboard to talk about value-added food and beverage manufacturing. This is the agri-foods component. Things like honey, things like craft brews, craft breweries everywhere around the province continue to do well. And I think in 2021, they'll also continue that trend. And finally, renewable energy and clean energy technology. And I referenced this a little bit at the beginning, talking about President Biden. But Alberta, we've been a world leader in renewable energies for a long time. I know sometimes we get a bad reputation in Alberta, deserved or undeserved, but sometimes people look at us and think, well, you're a one-trick pony. You're kind of, this knuckle-dragging hydrocarbon, fossil fuel producing region. But in fact, if you look at it, wind resources, renewable wind energy, first started in Alberta 28 years ago. So it's not even a new industry. It's already kind of a maturing industry. In 2021, we're going to see growth in renewables like geothermal energy and hydrogen. Now, admittedly, both of these are at their infancy for Alberta, but everywhere around the world, there's a lot of interest in hydrogen production. The Alberta and the Canadian governments both have really nice strategy platforms to develop geothermal and hydrogen. And then we also talk about clean energy technologies, things where we're applying bright minds, technological solutions to reducing the carbon intensity of our hydrocarbon fuels, especially carbon capture and storage. Now, this also isn't new. It's been around for a decade or more, but it's really starting to gain some traction here in Alberta. There's already a couple of oil-producing companies in Alberta which already are producing net zero carbon barrels of oil. In other words, for every molecule of carbon they extract out of the earth in their oil, they are sequestering carbon in the ground. So that barrel of oil comes out of the ground, it's carbon neutral. These are the areas where we need to be promoting Alberta. These are the growth areas. Traditional energy, our oil and gas is a backbone, probably not producing a lot of growth, but I think we have a tremendous opportunity in promoting and selling to customers around the world our renewable and our clean energy resources. So with that, oh, and one more slide. I forgot to, I just want to give a quick pitch. I have a podcast that the second season landed last week. The podcast is called The Future Of. And if you're interested, you can listen online at atb.com/thefutureof or on any of your favorite podcasting apps. You can just search The Future Of and look for the ATB branded The Future Of there. So now, with that, I will stop sharing. And do we still have a few minutes? I know we're after 8 o'clock already, but do we still have some time for some questions?
We definitely have some time for some questions, and I'm sure there'll be some out there. So if you have a question, unmute yourself and shoot. Or you can put it in the chat, and we'll try to read it out.
Yeah, maybe.
Hi,
do you
Todd.
want? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Hey, good to talk to you. I was just curious if you think that UBI will be more likely if we've got this K pattern.
Yeah, universal basic income. It's a great question. And we're hearing, even before COVID, for the last few years, more and more people have been talking about a universal basic income as a way of addressing this income disparity. I think as we move through COVID and after COVID, I think there will be a lot of discussion and conversations. In some ways, I mean, we look at the CERB payments that came out in 2020, in some ways, that was a really rudimentary universal basic income. It's no questions asked. Here's your $2,000. So I think that there will be some conversations. For myself personally, I don't know if that for me would be the hill to die on or not, but I'm at least open-minded enough to say, well, this is one option. What are some of the drawbacks? Maybe what are some of the benefits of it? I do see some of the benefits of a universal basic income, but I also think that there's some arguments against it too. But I do think we're going to be hearing a lot more about universal basic income.
No, thank you.
I had a question actually.
Yes, go ahead.
So with the pandemic and vaccines coming out, do you see that companies will start having people more in the office as opposed to having them work remotely? And I guess the reason I ask is has the productivity of companies gone down or gone up during the pandemic? So I'm just trying to figure out what's more likely to happen.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. And even though we're almost a year into COVID, I think the jury is still out. I think a lot of it will depend on the specific company and the type of work they're asking their employees to do. I know some companies, even before COVID, where they gave employees, like ATB Financial, long before COVID, they gave us the ability to work where it makes the most office. If that is at home, you work from where it makes most sense. As long as you're getting your work done, we trust you. Other companies, it is maybe not quite so simple. I think some bosses might still have some suspicions of their employees if they're unsupervised, if they're getting anything done. To which I would say, well, if you don't trust your employees, why did you hire them? I mean, you can sit at your cubicle and not do anything also. But I think what we're going to see is a mixture of both working remotely and people going back to the office. I know lots of people, they can't wait to get back to the office. They are going crazy working from home. They miss their colleagues. They miss getting up and getting dressed and going into an office. I know lots of other people, this is their best life ever working from home. I think we're going to see more flexibility. And I think employees will be drawn to companies that offer more flexibility. For myself, for example, I could imagine that I will go into the office, but I might not, every day, Monday to Friday, be at my desk at 8:30. I might, especially if there's a blizzard or something, right? I might spend the first couple hours at home, working from home and, doing what I can, and then maybe go in for meetings in the afternoon. So more flexibility. And I think that's what it's going to look like.
Thank you.
Should I be reading some of these questions in the chat? I guess I should. There's lots and lots of questions. So I'm not going to be able to answer every one of these.
Here's a question. What should our provincial government be doing to propel growth in the tech sector?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think I've been encouraged with the current government they have, and I'm not here to speak on behalf of the government, by the way. You'd have to ask the Premier or the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. But I think that there has been a healthy kind of refocus. I think when they were first elected, the focus was really on, oil and gas. We've got to get it healthy, and then we'll worry about everything else later. But I think there's been a healthy repositioning of that. And I have seen more emphasis on programs to assist the tech sector. In fact, revising, or I guess re-enlivening some of the programs that the NDP government had brought in that the tech sector really loved. So they've reintroduced a few of these programs. But I do think things, like they're offering some tax subsidies or maybe some other incentives to get companies to move here. I think that is a first step. We have to be careful as to how much we're giving, because not only do other sectors start to say, hey, wait a minute, what about us? But you also don't want a situation where the company is only here because of the subsidy. And the minute the subsidy ends, they leave. And tech companies are very, what we call footloose. They can go anywhere. You know, they don't, not unlike an oil producing company, they don't need to be geographically attached. So I think there are some things that we can do, but I think the single biggest thing all of us can do as Albertans, and maybe our provincial government as well, we need to be more positive minded and talk up Alberta. I think there's kind of a crankiness, I would say, that has maybe settled across Alberta the last few years, not just during COVID. A bit of grumpiness about, you know, poor us, and I get it. I know there's grievances for sure with Ottawa, but I think if we send out a negative attitude, young people for sure, they don't want to be part of that. And tech companies, if they want to, you know, a tech company from Toronto or from England or from Sydney, if they're looking to relocate or set up an office, why on earth would they choose to move to a place where everyone's, you know, crabby? So I think we need to be putting out a really positive, upbeat vibe that this is a province where you can do anything.
Go ahead.
Hi, Todd, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. Just as a devout environmentalist, I'm kind of concerned at the big picture about outsourcing and offshoring manufacturing and battery production to a country with low or no environmental standards. As we send everything to China, have there been studies done on the net impacts of sending all production there, where again with the lax standards?
Well, it's a really interesting point you raise, and you know, I think it underscores the fact that there is no silver bullet when we look at solving some of our carbon challenges. So to the people who say, well, you just need to get an electric car and this solves all the problems. Well, in fact, it doesn't solve all the problems. To what you're alluding, you know, battery production, that can be enormously damaging to the environment, especially when a lot of those chemicals and precious metals come from countries like China, where there are really not the kinds of regulations we would like to see. So we have to think about, when we use energy as people, we have to understand that there is no one magic bullet, that there are a lot of solutions, that we have to look at all of them, but we can't get too wound up in saying, just stop filling your car with gasoline and buy an electric vehicle, because that's going to have other consequences too. There's a really interesting movie I watched maybe almost a year ago. It was during COVID. Michael Moore, of all people, put it on. You might know about it. And I forget what it was called now. But he released it on Netflix for free for a month. But if you Google Michael Moore, most recent film, but it basically challenges all of these, you know, silver bullet solutions like solar or battery powered cars or biomass. And he says he doesn't, you know, say don't do this, but he says there's more to the story than just, you know, you drive a battery car and now everything's fine. That we have to think about the whole systems that deliver these technologies. And there's environmental impacts in every one of them.
That's true.
Hey, to Todd, earlier in the meeting, there was a question about commercial real estate. Now, in your travels, have you, you know, is there any insight you can share on kind of, you know, it's been a tough year for commercial real estate, and the move to more people at home obviously is work from home is a I guess a factor, but what are your thoughts on
well, I can tell you it's a lot worse in Calgary, where I am, than it is for you in Edmonton. But I know Edmonton has its challenges too, with a lot of vacant commercial space. You know, typically in the past, like, you know, commercial real estate, especially in kind of boom and bust cities like Calgary and to some degree Edmonton, you know, we always sort of go through these cycles. Never in my 3 decades as an economist have I seen vacancy rates this high. And I think they're going to be slower in coming down. But I think what we need to do, you know, rather than talking about it being vacant office space, just talk about it being vacant space. Because if we use the word office, it kind of traps us, or it keeps us into this frame of mind that we have to wait until companies fill those spaces up with cubicles of workers, traditional office workers. That model in a lot of ways was dying anyway, and COVID has accelerated it. So those office towers might not fill up in the same way with cubicles of workers. But if we think of it as vacant space, well, now that raises new possibilities. What else could go in that space? I know in Calgary, we're talking about putting some museum space in some of those empty offices, that vacant space. We're talking about recreation centers for senior citizens. We're talking about open dog parks where dogs can run around, the floor of an office tower. Like, we can start to be creative. I know it isn't possible for every office tower to convert to residential, and I know that's been talked about a lot. Certain office towers, it's just not going to work. The floor plate of the office is not conducive to this. But I think there's lots of possibilities if we be creative, but it requires us to stop thinking about those spaces being filled with desks of workers.
That makes sense. Yep.
Hey, Todd, I had another question.
Yeah.
So, earlier you mentioned that about the K curve and how some workers will be doing fine, and then some workers won't be. My question is, do you see any opportunities where these kind of like, I guess, differently skilled workers can kind of like upskill into an area where there's more job opportunities? Just trying to see what I can do to help, or what we can do to help.
Well, upskilling is definitely part of it, or maybe the most important part. I guess the trick is that upskilling is kind of difficult depending on the individual. And I don't want to be too generalized about this, but for younger people, upskilling is more possible, and it's just more viable. If you're talking, somebody like my age, I'm 54. If I had to start a career all over again and was starting already out with a low skill set, it's going to be kind of difficult. You have to also, as the individual, you have to be willing to be retrained and to go after those opportunities to learn new skills. And not everybody is. So yeah, definitely, offering upgrading of skills, getting more of those, especially the soft skills, the interpersonal people skills into the hands of individuals. All of that is really important if we're going to pull some of the downside of the K into the upside of the K. But it's easier said than done in reality.
Okay, thank you.
Someone typed in here, learn to code. Coding is a skill I do not have, but I would agree. It's, if you know how to code, it's a good skill to have.
Well, any last questions before we let Todd go have dinner?
Well, if there aren't any, I would just like to thank you once again for inviting me to be part of your group. I hope next time you invite me, we can all be together in person. I think I remember giving a presentation to your group one night, and the Oilers were in like the Stanley Cup final, or I don't know, there was something crazy like that. And all of you were still in the room, and I was so appreciative of all of you that you'd give up hockey to come together and learn. So good for your group. But can't wait till we can all be together again in person sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Todd. I always enjoy kind of the themes that you have on a yearly basis on how to I guess educate us more simple-minded folk.
Well, I always believe good images and good metaphors, those stick with people way better than charts and graphs. So
Amen.
Hope you enjoy. All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, Todd.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed that as much as I did. Todd has a way of explaining things